Now, if you are co-parenting with a narcissist and you really want to protect your kids from that toxic personality, there are a few things that you can do. But before I get into that, let me just give you a few ideas of the kinds of things that you're going to be in for if you are co-parenting with that narcissist. Number one is parental alienation. Most people who are alienators are also narcissists. And I have an entire video on narcissistic parental alienation, and I will drop a link to that below. You're definitely going to want to check that out. But they engage in all kinds of things that look like parental alienation, which is a campaign of denigration against you, trying to turn the kids against you so that the kids think that you're the most disgusting thing that ever walked the planet, even if you had a wonderful relationship with them before, and they start dripping on the kids in a way that starts turning the kids against you. It is very serious and very toxic. So definitely check out my video on parental alienation, narcissistic parental alienation, if you haven't already seen it. In addition to parental alienation and the campaign of denigration, they'll also just personally attack you, not necessarily just to the kids, but also just to you. So they will go on these personal attacks in messages, in person, to third parties, to whoever their lawyer is, in whatever way that they possibly can. They will go on this campaign of personal attack against you. And not to mention twisting everything that you say, gaslighting, manipulating you, and on and on and on. But the third thing that they're going to try to do is legal attacks on you. So they will use the system as their sword. They hide behind that. They don't want to actually have a conversation with you unless they think they're going to be able to control it. So if they, but they will file like 15,000 motions and then obstruct you in every possible way from getting any information and make you run up fees and spend lots of money. And then they'll, nicely come to you and say, oh, let's just go have a conversation at Starbucks or whatever, something like that. But they will use that legal system as their sword as a means to try to control you. If this is all sounding too familiar so far, give me a definitely in the comments. Okay, so what can you do to protect your children from this toxic personality? Let me just say at the outset that there's no easy answer here. There's no magic wand. There's no way to turn that narcissist into a normal person. They have a personality disorder. There's something wrong inside their head. And, nothing that you're going to be able to do is going to be able to change that about them. And the worst thing about narcissists is that they don't think there's anything wrong with them. So they'll never go and get help. So the only thing that you can do is control yourself and your behavior. Okay, so let's just say that at the outset. But there are a few things that you can do to minimize the issues and to protect your children. So number one is a custody evaluation. If you decide to get a custody evaluation, you have to file a motion for it unless the other side agrees to doing it. Sometimes they're so crazy that they want the custody evaluation to try to show the world how terrible you are, which is, kind of their way of projecting their own behavior onto the other person. But it is only in the context of a custody evaluation that you'll very easily be able to get psychological evaluations done. If you just ask for a psychological evaluation without bringing the children into it, without having a best interest reason for it, you probably won't get it. But if you say that it's for the best interest of the children, that you are concerned for the children and their welfare when they're with this person, and you put it at issue, then the court may, more than likely will agree to order this custody evaluation. They sometimes don't, even if they think they should, because sometimes they just feel that neither side can really afford it. They do get a little bit costly. It's certainly less costly than bringing 50 witnesses into the courtroom, because the custody evaluator, who is a trained psychologist, does all of that legwork at a much lower rate. So, you do get that, and they interview both of you. They interview the children. They get to come to your home. They get to interview anybody that's related to the children. They get to observe stuff. They do all kinds of testing, not just psychological testing, but they can do drug testing. They can do uh, testing on, somebody's propensity to be a good parent. There's all sorts of things that they can do. So it's something to consider. Number two is to stay unemotional. And those of you who are my regular listeners and viewers know that I say this all the time. And yet it is the hardest thing to do because they definitely know how to push your buttons. They definitely know how to get under your skin, and they will definitely try. So, but they will taunt you, goad you, do whatever they can to get you to respond and get down on their level and hopefully get you unglued so that they can use that against you. So stay as unemotional as possible. That's tip number two. Tip number three is if you really do believe that you or your children are in danger, don't wait to call your lawyer. Please call the police. There are other people that can help you as well. Sometimes there's shelters for abused women, or shelter even for men who are abused. Don't just sit there like a sitting duck. Please call the police. And once you do call the police and you do have a record of threats and things like that, you can potentially try to go get an injunction, also sometimes called a restraining order. And it, it's a little bit difficult for me to quantify when you can get a restraining order or when you can't. The one thing I will say, though, is that if you decide to try that path to hire somebody and a lawyer who really understands the system and understands the statute, because you want to make sure that it sticks if you do get the worst thing in the world is to try to go get one and then have it be dismissed, because then the other person feels empowered. So you're going to want to make sure that you're really you've got enough. Unfortunately, even if you feel in fear and you don't really have any way to prove why you're in fear, you probably won't get one. But if you are in real danger of physical abuse or stalking, something like that, please call the police. Number four, what you can do is use a co-parenting app that help you minimize the interaction between the two of you, because sometimes just the escalation of interaction between the two of you becomes a danger to your children. So if you want to protect your children, then minimizing the fighting and the back and forth and all the toxicity and poison that's going on between the two of you will definitely help to protect your children. So more than likely you'll have to get a court order. More than likely the other person won't agree to it. Even if they do agree to it, have that agreement or stipulation turned into a court order so that the other person is ordered to use it, because if they're a narcissist, they're not going to want to use it. Even if they're court ordered to use it, they'll still try to figure out ways around it. Well, we're here right now, let's just talk. Or, oh, it's too hard to use the app, I'm just texting you. They'll still try to find ways around it, but then at least it's a violation of a court order. Okay, my next suggestion is non-disparagement clauses, and those can be written right into a parenting plan where it says, neither parent is allowed to talk badly about the other parent to the children. Now, I'm going to tell you that most of the time I find these kinds of clauses to be aspirational rather than actually useful, because it's really hard for a court to enforce them. Even if you have proof, even if you have a text message from the parent to the child that says, mommy is a loser or daddy is a drunk, even then the judge is probably just going to go, don't do it again. I mean, because it's really hard to enforce that kind of an agreement. So my suggestion to you is to have some kind of extra thing written into the agreement that helps you enforce it. Like if the person violates it, then the person who violated that clause loses the ability to have ultimate decision-making authority on one particular area or another, like medical or educational or something like that. Oh, and the person who violates it has to pay both sides fees or something like that. Give the judge some kind of teeth to be able to enforce that court order. Number 6 is document, document, document. You all know, who are my regular listeners, you better document every single thing. Have the notes section open to your phone or use an app or whatever you need to do. I've won entire court cases on documentation. So, person's late or they didn't show up to take the kids or whatever, so that down the road you can potentially modify that parenting plan so that you get more time sharing than the other person does. And the last one is to get therapy for your child. You might have to get a court order for this. You might have to go to the judge and say, my child needs therapy, because if the other person doesn't agree to it, which if they're a narcissist, they probably won't, because they probably don't believe in therapy and they're afraid of what therapists might uncover or say about them. Um, or they just won't agree to it because that's what you want and they just don't want to give you what you want. So you might have to go and ask the court to order that it's okay, but give your children an outlet, give them a place that's protected for them to talk about what's going on and how they're feeling about the entire situation. So some states do actually have statutes that say that only one parent's permission is needed for therapy. So you'll have to check with your lawyer on what is needed for ordering a child to therapy in your particular state.
You're trying to get a narcissist to listen to you. And especially when it comes to negotiating with a narcissist, it ain't going to work when you think that you're going to try to get them to acknowledge you, see your side, hear your version, listen to you, play upon all the things that you might have done for them. It's so hard. I was having a conversation with some of the people in my certification program just this past week. And some of them were really saying to me how angry they are, how filled with rage they are. And I get it. I've been there. I've been where you are. Because the problem that you have is that you are on the side of feeling like you had this life and you're now here and you're trying to communicate with them and you're trying to get them to listen to you. And you're in this place of wanting them to hear you and wanting them to feel something about what you've been through, thinking that somewhere in there, they're going to get to some place of understanding your position of this, but they're not going to. And that's what is so hard to wrap your head around. And that's the very essence of this. When you're having a conversation with them and you're like trying to get to the other side, when you're negotiating with them, when you're communicating with them, when you're having this back and forth, and you're thinking, there's got to be something there where I see a human being and I'm a human being. There must be something that's similar, other than the fact that, let me just say this, all human beings want to feel seen, heard, and know that they matter. The difference is when you're dealing with a narcissist, they just can't see anything but themselves. They just can't. And anything other than themselves is just kind of like noise. And so when you're trying to communicate with them about your needs or your wants or your wishes or what happened with you or taking accountability for themselves or anything like that, that's when it just gets into this is a heavy conversation, or this is just a difficult conversation, or where are we going with this? It's Charlie Brown, wah, wah, wah. I'm not doing this. I can't do this. Their brain just can't go there. They're not able to process what you want them to be able to process. It's like asking somebody to do something with arms if they don't have arms. And you have to be able to just understand it like that. That part of their brain is just not functioning in the same way that your brain functions. They had trauma to their brain. It's just not going to happen. So forget about getting them to see your side, acknowledge you. You're not going to do it. And so if you think at the beginning of a negotiation that you're going to garner some kind of favor by giving them something, and they're going to go, oh, look at that, they did something, and I see that, and now I'm going to acknowledge that. They just see that you gave them something that belonged to them, and now they're entitled to that, and that's that. So the only thing that's going to work for them is if you do something, either what I call fluff or favor, vomit later, where you are fluffing up their ego in order to get something that you want. Oh, you're so great at this. Look at you. Wow. You're so amazing. And it's all within the prism of how wonderful they are. And then you just go vomit later. And then you can even, like in a negotiation, make it their idea. They're none the wiser. You can even throw them off about what it is that you want. Oh my God, I can't believe you got that. Oh, wow. You do your best Meryl Streep or Robert De Niro or whoever your favorite person is. Or you can alternatively have to create leverage where you are going to threaten a source of supply that's more important for them to keep than the supply that they're getting from manipulating you, which is that tiered supply system, which is what I talk about, which is that diamond level supply, which is their image, their reputation, and then that what I call coal level supply, which is manipulating you. Because if you don't ever figure out what those supply sources are, they're probably never going to leave you alone. And that's how you can get them to leave you alone, is create what I call strategy, leverage, anticipate, and you, which is my SLAY method. And that's it. I mean, they're actually very simple to understand. They're just difficult people, but they're very simple to understand. Kind of like an amoeba, as far as like how simple they are to understand, but they're extremely difficult people. The only way to deal with them and communicate with them is just to understand that that is what's happening inside their brain. It's never going to be this way. It's never going to be a two-sided relationship.
Best way to continue to keep my narcissistic abuser away from my kids. As of right now, he has no visitation, but I'm concerned if he ever decides to file. So, Emily, I definitely have videos on this, on how to protect your child from a narcissistic parent and things like that. So, what I would suggest that you do is check out that video. It'll be much more in depth than what I can give you as a quick answer here. But in general, definitely keep documentation of everything. Ask for a custody evaluation if you think that there's really a problem. If you think that your children are in danger, then you may want to check with your lawyer or the authorities in your state about potentially getting some sort of a protective order that protects the children. Psych evals, things like that. Definitely therapy for the children, and just making sure that the court is aware of what's going on at every turn. So keeping really super detailed documentation, have the notes section open on your phone, exactly what's been going on, that sort of thing. So if he has no visitation now, more than likely, there's going to be maybe some sort of a step-up plan, like, supervised time sharing first, and then if the if everything is satisfied with the supervised time sharing, then maybe they graduate to like dinner once a week that's not supervised, or a couple of hours on a Saturday morning that's not supervised, like no overnights right away. And then if that goes well, then maybe they graduate to having like one overnight a week. Normally they don't literally go from no time sharing at all the way to like a 50-50. I mean, that very rarely happens, because it's like kind of shocking for the kids too to figure out what's going on with all of that. Today we are here talking about how to co-parent with a narcissist, which might sound like an oxymoron, because anything with a narcissist is kind of an oxymoron.
Well, I told people it's not co-parenting, it's single parenting with an elephant on your back. This is, it actually would be easier to be a full-on single parent than to co-parent with a narcissist. And I have to say, of all the areas, Rebecca, we're always generating content. We have a magnificent YouTube community, and they're always giving us new ideas for content. Co-parenting has got to be one of the top topics. But what I'm glad about, I was about to do it alone, but then you and I met. And then I thought, no, I want people to hear, because what they're getting frustrated with is the legal elements. I can walk them through the psychological thickets, but there are certain things legally that happen that incense them even more. And you might be able to shed some light on that.
So the first thing I want to say is co-parenting with a narcissist is something that you're dealing with when you're living in the same household, as you're breaking up, after you've broken up. I mean, so there's several different stages of it. And then the other thing is that it's actually slightly different, even though a lot of the same issues, if you're dealing with somebody who you're just breaking up with. A lot of the millennials are not getting married anymore. And so there's not a divorce involved. And then there's also the divorce piece too. So there's kind of two separate ways that I look at it from the legal perspective, because one is a paternity action and one is a divorce action. And there's actually different ramifications for both when you're co-parenting. But in either one of the things that I tell people is to expect the narcissist to be a narcissist. So, there's not going to be any magic wand that anybody can wave that is going to turn this person into a person with a conscience, a person who has empathy, a person who cares about anybody but themselves. They'll say they care about their children. And that's one thing that you will hear all the forms of narcissists say. I love my children. My children are the most important to me. Because all narcissists know that that's what they're supposed to say. So you will hear them all say that. But when you're dealing with a real narcissist, it becomes pretty evident that that they're narcissists, because they lack empathy and they really don't want what's best for the kids. They want what's best for them.
Well, one of the big challenges, and the question I get a lot, is why do narcissists even have children? It really doesn't make sense. Children are incredibly inconvenient. They're demanding. They tend to suck all the oxygen out of the room. I know that's a sort of an unfair depiction. I say this as a mom, but it's hard. There's a lot of compromise involved in being a parent. Once again, one would say, why would a narcissist do this? And in a significant number of cases, narcissists become parents because they want the window dressing, the same way they might get a fancy car or wear a fancy outfit or go and take the right vacation. It's window dressing. So even after a relationship breaks up or a person gets a divorce, they want to maintain the facade. They want to maintain the window dressing. And in many cases, too, the dynamic is that the child is either a source of narcissistic supply for them or an extension of their identity. And so that idea of losing control over that, and that's a lot of why co-parenting is hard. Narcissists hate losing control. They like to be in control of everything. And as you've mentioned so many times, and I know very well from working on this clinically, they want to win. They want to win. And for them, the win is to show the world, look, I got my kids, I beat her or I beat him at this game, without really thinking through what it means to have these children 50% or even more of the time.
But they don't want to win because they think that it's best for the kids to have them 50% of the time. It has nothing to do with what's in the best interests of the child or children. It has to do with beating the other person or showing that they're the winner, or maybe it has to do with manipulating the other
Right.
person, making the other person miserable, a way to gaslight them, a way to continue the campaign of control and the attempt of controlling the other person and their lives.
The hard part, though, and this is where I really look forward to your expertise, is the thing that messes up a lot of people. So I'll be working with a client. The person who is experiencing the narcissistic abuse has effectively been a sort of single parenting, constantly dealing with the shenanigans of the narcissistic parent. Now they're going through a curated court process, and these stupid terms like co-parenting come up. If anything, going through this process is the first time that they're actually having to interact with this person this much about these kids. Before, while they were still married, the narcissist was just sort of doing their own thing and showing up when they want. And so
I hear this
that's
all the
term.
time.
It's like this idea that now the court, you weren't co-parenting when you were married, for God's sake. And now
totally.
you're ending this relationship.
They were off doing their own thing
Exactly.
the whole time.
The relationship ends, and now there's this demand for something collaborative to happen where there's absolutely no template for this.
Well, and even beyond that, I mean, I agree with you. Now they have to actually collaborate and co-parent with each other and cooperate. But even more than that, now this other parent is demanding to have 50% of the time with the kids, and most of the non-narcissist parents will come to me and go, well, he or she never was there 50% of the time. They don't even know where the kid's school is. They don't know what their favorite food is. They don't know what they eat for lunch. They don't know who their teachers are. Well, here's the difficulty with that. That is that the judges don't care. The judge's position is they'll learn. They can learn. They can learn how to bathe the children. They'll figure it out. They didn't co-parent before because they didn't have to, because you were there. And so, and the climate in the courtrooms now is very much an assumption for 50-50.
I totally agree. Yes, absolutely.
It's really, in legal terms, we call it a presumption. And what that means is who has the burden of proof. So it used to be that the presumption was that a 50-50 custody plan was actually contrary to the best interests of the child. I could find you case after case after case that said that rotating custody, which is what a 50-50 plan was against the best interests of the child. Even before that, we had the tender years presumption, which presumed that if you had young children, they went to the mom. And dad's got, we got the term Disney dad. Dad's got every other weekend, dinner on Tuesday night, and that was it. I mean, that's how it went. And for years, even when I started practicing, we just stapled that parenting plan to the back of the marital settlement agreement, and that was that. There really wasn't a whole lot of fight about it.
That's interesting.
So what's happened is, a lot of the states have removed language from the statutes that made one parent seem more important than the other. So this happened 10, 12 years ago across the country, where they removed language like primary residential parent or custody. Even the word custody has oftentimes been removed, or visitation. Who's visiting their kid, right? Or their kid is visiting them, or whatever. I mean, so when they removed that language from the statutes, it inadvertently created this shift that now both parents are equal. But that's where we stand now. I mean, like it or not, and I actually have a case going right now, as we speak, where the husband is a flaming narcissist, and he filed for divorce when my client was 8 months pregnant, a month before she was getting ready to deliver. The child is now 6-8 months old, and he is demanding 50% custody. 6-month-old child. She's still breastfeeding. And guess what? We were in court a couple of weeks ago on a different matter in the case, and the judge, who's a white male, said, don't come back here to trial unless you're planning on getting 50-50, because that's what I'm going to be ordering. He hadn't even heard the facts of the case. He didn't know what's in the best interests of the child yet. Had no idea.
Right.
But so that's what we call a presumption, because he's presuming that the best interest is 50-50, which means she's now going to have the burden of proving why 50-50 is no longer shouldn't be.
Which gets so to take it back to what we're talking about, which is, you know, we could talk all day, all night about the fact that the way family court is being run now, because I think that what I see and the agony that I see my clients who are experiencing narcissistic abuse and are going through divorce procedures are experiencing is that it's the inability of the court to make any kind of a qualitative judgment. That, you know, not that they're necessarily saying one parent is better than the other or not, but rather that it's like you said, these things like rotating schedules may not be indicated for, especially when one parent moves an hour away, and so what are you going to do in the morning? This poor kid's going to have to wake up hours
or has a crazy
earlier,
work schedule.
or it's a crazy work schedule,
or, maybe
or travels a lot. Exactly.
Yeah.
So all of that, but this is not what we're talking. We're not talking about those practical things. What we're talking about is something that isn't as black and white as traveling and moving and all of that. It's about this thing that the court either won't or can't recognize, which is these toxic personality patterns.
Yep.
And we've talked about this. We talked about this on an earlier episode in this series, which is you cannot use the word narcissist.
No.
In the courtroom. You cannot. I've seen it blow up. You can't use the word gaslighting in a courtroom.
No, because
None
they just
of this
assume that you're an
terminology.
alienator.
Exactly.
Which we're going to be talking about in another episode.
Or that you're the difficult parent.
Correct.
So all of that we've talked about strategically. But now I know what at least the people have been saying in my YouTube community is, will you please tell us then how to do this? I mean, so I know from my side as a psychologist, when I'm walking people through co-parenting with a narcissist, it's things like, you know, you have Family Wizard, use Family Wizard, and never gravitate off of Family Wizard. You use it
or another
religiously, whatever app it is. Family Wizard is the one that's come up the most in the cases I've worked on. But whatever app that has been agreed upon, whether it's through mediation or in court, whatever, you use that. And even when, because what happens is the narcissist loves breaking rules and violating boundaries, but when all of it goes through that one space, then in some ways you're just sort of slapping their hand. But above all else, I say documentation, realistic expectations. Those are the two places we start from.
Okay, so you've hit on two of the ones that I was actually going to mention. So when I tell people about communication with a co-parent, I say pick one medium, just one. Have everything funnel through one.
Right, which could be one of these apps.
The app is the ideal thing.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily get them always to agree to it. That brings me to another thing, is every single agreement has to be turned into a court order, because even if you just sign the agreement, if it's not a court order, then you have no teeth. You have no way of going back and getting them to adhere to it. So, but definitely using an app, getting them to agree to that early on. Most states require some sort of mediation or some sort of dispute resolution early on in the case to figure out a temporary parenting plan, even if you haven't gotten to the final destination yet. So when you go to that conference, that settlement conference on the temporary parenting plan, that needs to be one of the first things that you want. You want to have a mode of communication that is controlled. And everything goes through that. And they will fight it. They will resist it.
Oh, heck yeah.
They will say, oh, it's too hard to use. Oh, we're just standing here talking. Why can't we have a conversation like two normal people? They're going to do whatever they can. But here's the thing. So I have a case right now. It just happened a couple of weeks ago where my clients are supposed to use an app. Okay. So he comes to pick up the child and, you know, takes the child for his parenting time. Next thing you know, she gets a thing through the app. Thanks for confirming, just confirming the conversation we just had, in which you agreed to allow me to have the child next Saturday during your parenting time. That conversation never happened. Didn't happen.
Yep.
But now he's trying to make her look bad by saying, oh, that she's going back on her word
yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. I see this all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's that combination, though, and the reason they psychologically don't like having that one consistent mode of communication is that narcissists thrive on triangulation. The creation of chaos by turning, bringing all these other people in and twisting truths, and then that also builds upon gaslighting. So then you can say things like, I never said that, that never happened, all of that. So those themes play out. So one of the questions that will often come up, because at the end of the day, the head of steam we're heading towards is that this is not good for children.
Right.
This is not good for the children, because that tends to get lost in the conversation is, well, there's people feeding them and, housing them and all of that. But this kind of tension, even if the parents aren't fighting in front of them, is really overwhelming for a child.
Yeah.
A question I get, and I'm so looking forward to asking you this because I don't know it, I never completely know the answer.
Okay.
People are going through a divorce.
Hopefully I
do. Girl, if you don't, we in trouble. So people are going through a divorce, okay? And it's very, very clear that the child is going to need therapy.
Yeah.
How does it work in divorce? Because one of the things that I see the struggle is that in many cases, in most cases, they need to get the agreement of the other parent, because you need both parties consenting to health care. And the other parent is resisting getting psychological services for that child. Can you shed some light on that? They're going to.
Definitely
Absolutely.
Going to.
So could you shed some light on that?
They want to shut down any areas where they're not going to have control.
As well as other eyes on that child, because the child having a chance to talk and really saying, this is tense, or my dad this, or, in other words, what narcissists hate are the seers of truth. So they don't like people who have their number. They don't like people who they know can see through them. They don't like people they can't charm. And they don't like people who are acting in these third-party objective capacities, like a good therapist who can't be swayed. They will try to win over that child's therapist.
If they end up in therapy, then they're going to definitely be in that therapist's face.
Let's go backwards for a minute. So you have a parent, the non-narcissistic parent is really worried about their child's mental health. They're like, and I'm going to tell them when I'm in session with the non-narcissistic parent, you really need to consider therapy for this child. Your child is struggling. Now they're having difficulty getting the other parent to consent. I'm working one case like this right now where you're talking severe mental illness in the child. And what's happening is that ultimately the parent is relenting, but even then is choosing substandard services. But let's go even more basic, that the narcissistic parent isn't agreeing to getting therapy for the child. What do they do?
If you've never heard that narcissism is not something someone's born with, it is created in childhood. It is the result of repeated trauma. And what Rebecca is explaining to you, and this piece of it is critical, that the trauma during childhood, emotional neglect, physical abuse, whatever the trauma may be, it causes arrested development in the part of the brain that is responsible for someone's emotions.
Yes.
And what does that mean? That means that while their prefrontal cortex, or their thinking part of the brain, is like fully functioning, their emotional part of the brain is lagging. That's why somebody who has a narcissistic personality has so little emotional control. And when you start to understand, oh, wait a minute, the thinking part of the brain goes forward, but the emotional one literally stops. If you've ever dealt with somebody who's narcissistic, I bet they spin on a dime. I bet all of a sudden they can rage at you. I bet all of a sudden they're like irrational. And when I started to realize in my own brain, oh, wait a minute, this is something that a narcissistic person has no control over. This is why they're so unpredictable. This is why they're immature. This is why they can say such mean things and be like, I never said that. It has to do with the delay in the emotional development while the thinking part of the brain is proceeding. And this is really important for you to understand, because this is not your fault.
Yes.
There is nothing you can do to change this. And getting yourself all wrapped around the axle because you got somebody in your life that tantrums at you like some 8-year-old. This is part of how the brain developed because of the, you heard the word again, arrested development in the limbic system. And this was critical for Rebecca to learn so that she could navigate the courtroom, so that she could be a savvy negotiator, so that she could get into the courtroom or into the deposition and win, because she knows she's dealing with somebody who's super sharp in the mind, but ridiculously immature in the emotions. And this is so life-changing for you to wrap your brain around, because this has nothing to do with you. And later, I promise you, Rebecca Zung is going to teach you her 4-step proven approach to negotiating with somebody that has narcissism and still winning. She's also going to give you the phrases that she likes to say that really disarm somebody with this kind of arrested development. And when we come back from a short word from our sponsors, you better be here, because I'm going to be here with Rebecca. And you know what we're talking about? We're talking about this phenomenon called blindness that happens when you have narcissism. And this is also part of how a person's brain develops during early childhood. And I can't wait for you to hear this. So stay with us. Welcome back. It's your friend Mel Robbins. I am so thrilled that you're still here, because we are with Rebecca Zung. She is one of the world's highest ranked attorneys, the U.S. Okay, I'm just so excited. I'm now starting to inflate her credentials. But the bottom line is she's a badass. And she's here teaching you and I about narcissism and what she's learned as a lawyer, and in research and writing 3 different books on the topic about understanding how narcissism is developed as a result of childhood trauma. And I want to recap what you've already learned, because this is going to empower you. So you've already learned that narcissists are not born, they are made, and they are the result of childhood trauma. And I'm going to repeat this part, because this is a game changer when you understand this. Due to childhood trauma, somebody with narcissistic tendencies or full-blown narcissism, what happens is the thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, it keeps on going and developing. But the limbic system, the emotional controls, has this arrested development, which is why when you're dealing with somebody that has narcissistic tendencies, they can seem super irrational or emotionally immature or like crazy selfish, like a 6-year-old who doesn't want to share their toys and then erupts in something. And then you're like, what is going on? And then somehow you feel like you're the problem. And so, Rebecca, I want to continue right in this thread. And I want to flip the script a little bit. Let's, as you're listening, I want you to think about somebody in your life that you're dealing with that either has narcissistic tendencies or is a full-blown narcissist. Maybe it's your mom or dad. Maybe it's your ex. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a boss. Maybe it's a kid. Somebody in your life that really fits the description that you're starting to fully grasp. Good. You got that person? Great. Now I want you to take that person. Let's just say it's your dad. And let's shrink your dad down and imagine who's just a little kid who is experiencing a traumatic situation in their house, whether it's emotional abuse, it's physical abuse, it's abandonment, it's loneliness, it's like whatever it may be, that is their reality. And so can you explain what's going on for that little 8-year-old kid that's exposed to this, Rebecca, and how narcissism develops?
So for children who are dealing with this continuously in households where there's a lot of stress, where there's a lot of trauma, and they're exposed to this on a continuous basis, while the prefrontal cortex part of the brain continues to develop, the part of the brain responsible for judgment or other, thinking, planning, that continue to develop. And so during the rest of their lives as adults, they appear to be functioning normally. There's actually a disconnect between the development between that part of the brain and the limbic system part of their brains. And so while they are, functioning normally in one part of their lives, and now something might happen, some sort of trigger, some sort of stimuli has caused them to feel like they need to be back into survival mode.
And that stimuli can be anything. And most times it's not necessarily rational or reasonable to most people, but it is to them. And it can be anything. It can be nonverbal or it could be verbal. It can be a nonverbal cue, such as an eye roll or a stance, or it could be a tone of voice. I always say narcissists hear tones like dogs hear whistles, but there's no tone, but they hear tone. So, it could be anything, but they get triggered. That thing triggers them. And because of the phenomenon called splitting that they have, where everything is black or white or good or bad or whatever, when that trigger happens, now they go from that prefrontal cortex back into the limbic system. That limbic system becomes activated. And now you're dealing with that limbic system, or they are dealing with that limbic system. And that emotionally charged state is what is taking over now at that point. And that is now that front part of their brain is no longer in charge anymore. It's their limbic system is now in charge. And when that happens, they don't necessarily remember or know what they're doing. That's what's now happening. And that when that happens, it's what's narcissistic injury is what it's called. And they will then take themselves down sometimes to take you down. The retaliation might happen. They inflict harm. They manipulate. They have little recollection of their actions at that point, and they are seemingly blind or indifferent to the collateral damage that they cause to themselves or others during that state. They are literally blinded by their actions.
We have to stop on this point right here, because what Rebecca is explaining to you when she talks about blindness and this being tied to the brain development, this changed my freaking life. And I want to take a highlighter and I want it to change your life. Because when you have somebody that is narcissistic in your life and they say, I never said that, that never happened, you're wrong, I didn't mean that, I always felt like they were lying to me, that there was this intent to destroy, right? And when I dug into the research, just like Rebecca dug into the research, and I learned that there is this term blindness, that due to the arrested development in the limbic system, which means they have little to no emotional control, right? That the emotional eruption, when they get that wave of emotion, it does override the thinking center and they completely forget what they did. And so I will say, are there narcissists that do it intentionally? Probably. But it was super helpful for me to realize that there are things that have gone down in our family, for example, in the past, where somebody with a narcissistic personality or narcissistic tendencies erupted and said some really cruel things. There were tears, there was a fight, there was upset, and it has always bothered me that the person has operated as if it never happened. And what I've come to realize is that based on the research, if it is a heightened emotional state, they might not even remember that it happened. And if we track back to the example that I gave you, remember when I asked you to just imagine, let's just say it's your dad who's narcissistic, and imagine him as an 8-year-old freaking out, right? And having a complete temper tantrum. do they remember the mechanics of the temper tantrum? Usually they don't. And so you kind of know this based on your experience, but being able to tell yourself, oh, they say this because they actually don't remember saying it. Yeah, they may be a sociopath dickhead too, but there's also this kind of, again, spectrum where because somebody is so emotionally immature and they get so triggered so fast and then they erupt with emotion and then they forget that they actually said it. And one of the things that I love about this is, we have had a number of the world's most renowned experts on this show. And one of my favorite things that I have ever learned about narcissism, I have learned from Dr. Ramani Diversala, who, by the way, is coming up for a 2-part series because she has a new book out about healing after you've been sucked into a narcissistic relationship. But one of the things that I learned from her, and this is why I keep repeating this stuff, that narcissists are not born. They're made, and they're made during childhood. And what I loved about that is that it allowed me to kind of feel sorry for a narcissist. And that may sound like a weird thing to say, but when you feel sorry for somebody, you get your power back because they don't seem so big and scary anymore. When I look at an adult who is narcissistic, you know what I feel? I'm like, wow, you must have experienced a lot of trauma as a kid. I feel pretty bad for you. And that ability to feel empathy or sadness or feel bad for somebody, it gives me my power and makes me not susceptible to their BS. You know what I'm saying? And so knowing that narcissists are not born that way, they're made. Tap into a little empathy. And now you know, because there is this arrested development, you are dealing with somebody who is not mature emotionally. And you are dealing with somebody who will tantrum as an adult. And you are also dealing with somebody who will likely deny that they did that because they're blind in those moments where they get wildly emotional. And Rebecca, why this is so important is that one of the most important things, and we're going to get into Rebecca's 4-part strategy that she uses when she needs to negotiate or navigate or diffuse or win against a narcissist. You're going to learn the phrases that diffuse somebody who has a narcissistic tendency or approach. But what I love about this is you're getting the why this works. You're getting the understanding. You're getting the facts and the science and the research so that you know this isn't about you. And I think that it's really empowering for me to know that every time this particular person in my life that I love, who is so easily triggered, who so easily rages, who so easily, like at the drop of a hat, boom, the mood changes, who's always about them, who's got crazy ass expectations, and the second that the expectations aren't met, they're pouting like a frickin' 6-year-old. When I can look at that and go, oh, this is childhood trauma. This is somebody who is not emotionally mature and probably never will be because the development of their limbic system got arrested due to childhood trauma. And that's why they don't think rationally. And that's why they can't control their emotions. And that's why this has nothing to do with me.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. And even beyond that, what people need to understand is when that is happening, and because that is happening, dealing with that in any situation means that you cannot communicate with them. You cannot negotiate with them in the same way that you can with a rational, reasonable person. You cannot.
Well, Rebecca, I love that you said that because we're both parents. And so just to make this as so simplistic that anybody of any age, anywhere in the 194 countries where this show is syndicated can understand it. Just like you cannot negotiate something with a 8-year-old the same way that you would negotiate with a fully functioning adult, you need to put someone who's got narcissistic tendencies into the camp of negotiating with an 8-year-old, because you're not dealing with a fully functioning, rational human being with fully developed emotional centers in the brain and the ability to regulate themselves or even understand what they're doing. Is that correct?
Yes. And I would even say an 8-year-old who's having a tantrum.
Okay. I love that. How did knowing that help you?
Oh, so much so. Because once you learn this, then first of all, you can stop taking it personally. Second of all, once you learn that you can stand in your own power and they're actually way more afraid of you than you are of them. I mean,
are they afraid? Do they feel fear? Like you start to feel like this person's such a cold piece of shit that you wonder, do they even feel fear? Do they not?
I mean, they're afraid that you're going to leave them. They're afraid of abandonment. They're afraid you're going to expose them. They're very fear-based individuals. I mean, they're afraid you're going to figure out that it's all a big ruse, that none of what they're doing is, that you actually have more value than they do. The next step is knowing that once you stand in your authentic power, that they can't touch you, because they prey upon people who don't have that. They prey upon people who have leaky boundaries. They prey upon people who are, they're going to be able to suck that supply from, because that's what it is that they need.
You use that term, leaky boundaries. What are leaky boundaries? Give us an example of what a leaky boundary would look like.
Leaky boundaries is when, instead of stopping somebody from doing something, we allow something to happen that we probably shouldn't. So, for example, we don't speak up when we should. So, I can say for me, like in my business, I saw some things happening with money, for example, and I didn't say something, and I should have. Sometimes maybe you allow things to happen, it's just like things happen in relationships where you shouldn't, and you don't speak up. You're just allowing things to happen when you shouldn't. And it's an emotional response to trauma, and it allows you to be open and vulnerable to situations, especially with narcissists, that allows them to come in and take control.
I feel so empowered, don't you? Now that you really understand the brain and the development and the emotional aspect of this, and that it's not your fault. And now that we got that, okay, we're armed with the knowledge, everybody. I want to pivot, Rebecca, and talk about this concept that you have researched extensively called narcissistic supply, because this concept also changed my life. And so based on your research, can you explain to the person listening, what does narcissistic supply mean? And we have to really put a lot of emphasis on this as you're listening. And here's why. Because you have to understand narcissistic supply in order to truly follow Rebecca's 4-point strategy, and in order to use the tactics to win. And it has to do with narcissistic supply, okay? This is paramount to you understanding and being able to effectively deal with narcissism, negotiate with a narcissist, stay grounded in your power, and not get sucked in to this supply and demand loop that Rebecca is just about to explain to you. So, Rebecca, give us the 101 on narcissistic supply and why it matters.
It's anything that feeds their ego. It's because ego is the only thing that they feel is, they're very steeped in ego. So, it's the only thing that motivates them. It's what fills them and gives them a feeling of value. So for me, I say there's kind of two levels of narcissistic supply. It's that diamond level supply and what I call coal level supply. And there's two tiers. To me, it's tiered. And it's important for people to understand that when they go to create leverage. This diamond level supply is all wrapped up in image. So it could be celebrities, it could be money, it could be a new girlfriend, it could be a judge in the courtroom, it could be their employers, it could be the employees, it could be a new
Could it be
wife.
the outfit they're wearing, the
Could be
car
an
they're
outfit
driving?
wearing.
You know,
It could be the label of the outfit. It could be what bank they're banking with. But it's all wrapped up in image. It's all wrapped up in what I call the window dressing of the world. But they will protect and defend the diamond level supply at any cost, even at the cost of their children. Even at the cost of their children. And I have seen it. Period. End of story. And then there's what I call coal level supply, which is also very, very important to them. They will, they love it, they need it, but there's a slightly less tier, which is degrading people, controlling people, manipulating people, treating people poorly, pushing other people down in order to make themselves feel good. So passive aggressiveness, little comments, that dress is very becoming on you for your figure, things like that.
One of the things that I've seen a lot, because I feel like I've mostly come in contact with people that do the coal level supply, that insult other people, manipulate other people, is this concept of triangulation, where they are gossiping and they are building bonds by trashing other people. They're the person in the corner of the room at a party who's gossiping about everybody else to create a bond with someone in the corner.
Yes.
And when I first heard about that as when I first heard about triangulation and that type of, as you call, coal level supply, trashing other people to bond with the people that you're with, that was my first introduction to narcissism about 5 years ago. I'm like, wait, that's what a narcissist does? Oh yeah, that's the number one sign that somebody has this as a personality type. Mm-hmm. And it was mind-blowing because I didn't realize that becomes something that somebody does in order to supply their own ego. Because when you're trashing other people, of course you feel better than other people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, once you see that trashing other people as a sign that you're dealing with narcissism, and you see it in the context of supply, I just want to warn you listening, you're going to see it everywhere. I mean it. You're going to see it everywhere.
If my ex is a narc sociopath with bipolar, should I not try to get supervised time sharing for my children? So let's talk a little bit about the best interest analysis when it comes to children. And again, I'm only licensed as an attorney in Florida, so I can talk in general about what courts are going to be looking for as far as best interest analysis when it comes to children. And basically, people have a right to be parents to their children. So they're going to start with this presumption that people have a right to be parents to their children. So, they may or may not entertain things that have to do, which, you think are really awful. In other words, they were a really horrible husband or a horrible wife, or maybe they were a horrible person. But, being a narcissist is not illegal, even though, yes, I think it should be in a lot of ways. But being a narcissist is not illegal, and it doesn't necessarily translate to, from the court's perspective, to making that person a bad enough parent that they're going to interfere with their rights to be a parent to that child. So, or children. So what that means is that you have to prove why that person shouldn't have rights to their children. And it's very, anyway, it's very difficult to prove sometimes. So, what you want to show, you don't want to go in and say this person is bipolar, or go in and say this person is a narcissist. I mean, narcissist is more like traits. I mean, yes, it's a personality disorder. Bipolar disorder, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but bipolar disorder could be more of a chemical imbalance. And I've known plenty of people who have bipolar disorder who are on the proper medication and don't necessarily, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad parents. It just means that, they have to be regulated. And you want to be really careful about not making it look like you're saying that there's something wrong with someone just because they happen to have a mental illness. Now, all of that being said, if they have something that is, their mental illness is causing harm to the children in some way, let's say that the person is violent with them, or maybe they're just impulsive and they're not thinking straight. They've left the children alone in the car. They've left them alone to go out drinking. They have, all different types of partners coming in and out of the house at all different hours of the day. And, there's no stability for the children. You want to focus on things like that, not necessarily coming right out and saying, hey, this person is a narcissist or this person is bipolar. So while, it sounds really dramatic to say this person is bipolar and they're a narcissist, the courts, meaning the judges, are going to look a little bit more to, okay, but how does that affect their parenting, and how does that affect what happens when the kids are at that person's home? Can they provide a stable home for the children? So the short answer is it might cause them to need to have supervised time sharing, but it may not. And even if somebody has supervised time sharing, a lot of times the courts are going to require some kind of a plan or a step-up plan where maybe they're, no longer going to have to be required to have supervised time sharing. It's pretty rare that they are going to be on supervised time sharing for the rest of the children's time sharing, until they're, let's say they're 5 years old for the next 13 years or whatever. So I would just say that sometimes it can make a difference, but sometimes it definitely, isn't necessarily the case. So I'm trying to finish answering your questions and also sort of look at other questions. I'm seeing, it's kind of hard because I'm looking at this on my phone, but I'm seeing something about withholding medication. And, whenever a court is looking at what's going to be best for the children, they're definitely going to take a look at things like, okay, maybe the children are, diabetic, or they have ADHD or something that requires them to need medication on a regular basis. And they will take a look at whether or not that parent is giving them the medication. I've actually had judges put directly into court orders, that when they're with this parent, that this parent agrees to give the children the medication that they are supposed to have, as prescribed by the doctor. I mean, I've had parents who, I had a client one time who was ADHD himself. He did not like the idea that he was on medication when he was a kid. And so he ended up, not liking giving the medication to his own son. So he just didn't give it to him. And, in his mind, he felt like he was doing his son a favor because he said when he was a kid, it made him feel bad, like sluggish or whatever it was. I can't remember why he said it didn't, work for him. But he just refused to give it to his child when he had the child with him. So, um, okay, so somebody's saying, what are my chances if the other party is an alcoholic and neglectful? It's so hard to say what are your chances, when it comes to supervised time sharing or, and it's like, what is it that you're asking for? And one of the things that I want to caution people against is when you're asking for supervised time sharing, be really careful about what it is that you've done in the past, because you can't ask for supervised time sharing and then the kids have been in this person's care on a regular basis for several years, and now all of a sudden that the divorce is filed, you're asking for supervised time sharing. Or you're asking for limited time sharing. And the limited time sharing thing, I also think, can be a little bit of a slippery slope, because if you're asking for limited because you think that they're in danger when they're with that parent, I almost feel like you should be asking for supervised, because if they're in danger for 50% of the time, wouldn't they still be in danger if they're only there 20% of the time, or 5% of the time, or any percent of the time? So you just have to be really, really careful about that. And okay, somebody's saying something about peanut butter. It's like really hard for me to see because I'm on my phone because of the technical difficulties for today. But obviously, if your child is allergic to peanut butter and your child almost died because the parent gave that child peanut butter, that's a really good fact for you. That's a really good thing for somebody to present. So, as far as, trying to get supervised time sharing or something like that, anything like sole custody, supervised time sharing, again, you're starting against the wave there, because the wave is like supposed to be 50-50.
And it's really, really sad because many times people become narcissistic because they've had narcissistic parents. They go on to marry people and the cycle just goes on and it causes so much pain and so much shame. Why does this keep happening? Why does this keep happening? It can be a cycle that you think, how come, one person can become a narcissist and another person doesn't? One of the books that I highly recommend, in addition to mine, of course, which is Slay the Bully, How to Negotiate with a Narcissist and Win, it is actually What Happened to You, which is Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry. Bruce Perry is a brain expert, and he talks about the trauma that happens to a person's brain. And I found it so deeply interesting because it's like the physiology, easy for me to say, of what happens to a person's brain and why narcissists are the way that they are. If you can understand why they are the way that they are, then you can understand why they don't have the capacity to love, why they don't have the capacity to have empathy the way that other people do. So maybe if I go back and I explain that to you, then you can understand why they don't necessarily love their children in the same way that other people love their children. So, how a narcissist is formed is out of trauma. So, when we as human beings are dealing with stressful situations, our brains emit chemicals, neurotransmitters, and it causes us to go into fight or flight. When that happens, our brains then can go into stress, right? And it causes adrenaline and cortisol to be emitted. When that happens as children on a regular and continuous basis, it can actually cause arrested development in that limbic part of the brain. While the prefrontal cortex part of the brain can continue to develop naturally and normally, that limbic part of the brain, the emotional center part of the brain, does not. And so what happens is you're dealing with a person who literally is like a toddler stuck in an adult body. And so when they're presented with situations that cause them to be triggered, then they are back into that limbic brain. That limbic brain becomes activated again. It causes that to take over their entire brain. And so they're no longer being run by the prefrontal thinking part of the brain. They're being run by that emotional center part of the brain now. They could be triggered by anything, feeling like they're going to have a loss of control, that they're slighted. It could be verbal or nonverbal, a body language or a tone or whatever. But when that happens, then they're not thinking clearly. They're unaware of the emotional or collateral damage that they're causing around them to other people, but even to themselves. They're literally going to be willing to take themselves down to take other people down. I remember thinking this as an attorney before I understood what was happening here. I remember thinking, why in the hell would this guy like say, I'll destroy my business just so that, I don't have to pay the wife alimony? But this is what was happening. So now going back to a reason why a narcissist doesn't love their children, what is happening here is if a person is in so much pain and so much shame and so much dealing with all of this all the time because they're just in their own headspace, they don't have the capacity to have empathy for another person because it's all about them. It's all about, how can I get attention from myself? How can I suck that energy from other people to get attention from myself? They're literally the ones who need it the most. And so their children are really there to fuel their desperate need for affection, their desperate need for validation. It's like a young child who has a desperate need for love, a young child who has a desperate need for this. And when that young child is not getting that, then they just are looking to manipulate the situation in whatever way that they can to get it. They use their children in the same way that they use everybody else, and that is to manipulate them to derive their need, their insatiable need for validation, for admiration as extensions of themselves rather than unique individuals who are supposed to get unconditional love from their parents, but rather they see their offsprings as tools to bolster their self-image, to bolster their ego, rather than nurturing them with genuine affection, with genuine support. It's got to be conditional. Like, I will give you affection, I will give you support, I will give you attention, but only if you fulfill my emotional needs, right? I will praise you and I will give you attention, but only if it serves my agenda, only if it enhances my reputation, or only if it gives me what I want. It's got to be transactional. It lacks depth for them. It lacks authenticity for them. That's the problem with narcissistic love for their children. And if their children don't return to them what it is that they're looking for, if they're not serving that agenda, if they're not serving that need, if they're not properly doing the things that they are supposed to be doing, then that causes a disturbance in the force. Well, that child might get cut off, or that child may be punished in some way or not spoken to. There are going to be consequences. And so what happens is that child is now feeling the effects of having a narcissistic parent. It causes deep emotional wounds in them, and it causes long-lasting effects on that child's feelings of self-worth, of course. Healing from the effects of the scars of having a narcissistic parent is a journey. It's a journey fraught with challenges and struggle and sadness. But you can heal. And one of the things you have to do, as much difficulty as it may cause you, is you have to create a boundary, even if it is your mom, even if it is your dad, because it is an act of self-care. And that boundary is that boundary that they created, not that you created. How does that look? Well, it might just look like we're going to have a new kind of a relationship. And this kind of a relationship looks like, here's how we talk. We talk like this. You respect me. You respect my relationships. You respect my time. It might just look like that. Or it might look like, here's when we get to see each other, or here's how we speak to each other. The boundary that they created based on their behavior. It's you being compassionate with yourself. You may need to seek compassionate support. You may need to seek support from a community, which is why I created things like my high conflict negotiation certification.
Once someone is finally out of a relationship and they're still dealing with the emotional trauma, I mean, it takes a while to get over this. What can they do? I know you offer something called Thriver on your website. Maybe you could share with the listeners a little bit about that.
Sure. So there's a lot of things that survivors have to learn about themselves to understand why they were a victim, why they didn't see it. And a lot of that peeling back of the onion and the layers are work that they have to do. So a lot of times it's that they just didn't simply know what a boundary was. Or that they didn't know that they were a people-pleasing person, which is an asset that a narcissist will hone right in on. Oh, goody, someone's going to do my laundry for me. So you have to learn those skills. But so often when you've been through this whirlwind of crazy, you end up with PTSD. And sadly, most doctors don't even can identify that. If you go to the doctor while you're going through a horrific divorce, you're thrown on antidepressants, you're thrown on anti-anxiety, you can't sleep, you're thrown on sleeping pills. That's what a doctor would say. Most therapists, I think there's a number out there of in the high 60% don't even know what a narcissistic personality disorder person or relationship looks like. So make sure you're getting really good counseling. Make sure they understand what your plight is and how you can recover, because talk therapy is one thing, but getting into those memories and kind of helping deal with the anger, because you're going to have grief, you're going to have anger, you're going to have fear. Middle-aged people like myself going through a divorce, what am I going to do now? Everyone has those fears. So we did design this Thriver recovery course to help people move past that anger and to take that memory out and almost detach the emotional attachment to even that day in court, that horrible day that you can remember. If you're holding on to that anger, you're holding on to their memory, and they stay attached to you. They're baggage in your backpack, walking along into the next relationship with you. And so you have to cut that tie to that emotional bound. And also, we have another course which is based on forgiveness. And forgiveness, I think, is the wrong word here. It's, again, releasing them from your memory, releasing that pain that gets triggered every time you go by that restaurant that he proposed at, or you have these triggers that come. There's a way of getting rid of those. And we have an NLP course on there that is extremely powerful.